This is again in the Himalayas, and many of you might know what that is. Cauliflower mushroom, which, by the way, is a polypore. It's part of the polyporalis. So it's in its own families, but it's with the polypores. And they grow pretty big. They are parasites on the root system, and they are basically idiot-proof to identify. It's a pile of egg noodles somewhere in the forest, but they have a better structure than egg noodles. I mean, they're totally al dente. They have a really nice aroma, a little bit lemony, fruity, and fungal. Really special mushrooms. Unfortunately, we don't find them too often. The issue is that they are really, they like old growth. Find them still in plantation forests where there's some old stumps. They still hang around and digest the wood, but sometimes also with younger conifers. And you can do a lot of things when you cook because they have that firm structure and a good taste. So really, really awesome mushrooms. Now you might, did we find a switch for these lights here?
Can we turn them right out?
Yeah, just turn them out.
Off.
You don't need to see me, the mushrooms is good enough. Yeah. There we go, see? So now just behave there in the dark, okay? So here, of course, many of you might already recognize what that is. This is sulfur shelf or chicken of the woods, one in Tibet, one in Bhutan, and here out in the Pacific Northwest. And when you find them in this stage, you are too late. There's nothing to eat here. So here already with the raggedy edge, too late. This is too hard to digest. They get very fibrous. I have heard of a person who ate them in that stage and it took only 2 hours to digest, front to end. Painful. If your body moves something that fast through your system, this is not enjoyable. So in this case here, this is a young one. So at least always start trying at the edge. It should be just tender and not much fibrous. So in the older the fruiting bodies get, the more fibrous they get. And often out here, they get also sour. So when you go back east or in California, different species of Lactiporus, then that sourness is not an issue. And then you gotta cook them well. So what I do with them is minimum is I slice them up, I put them in a frying pan and fill that with water. So I cover the whole mushroom in water, let the water boil away, and then I fry it. And a commercial picker in California told me he doesn't deliver them to restaurants raw anymore because the chefs would undercook it and then he gets accused of selling them a poisonous mushroom. And it's just, I told you, you gotta cook it. So minimum for these things, 20 minutes. So 20 minutes is really a good time for mushrooms where you get warnings. And here we have this strange case of somebody in Oregon dying from an anaphylactic shock, which usually is not associated with mushrooms. So I gotta dig deeper and see if there is actually a connection, but I have that from Michael Buke, mycologist in Washington, retired from Evergreen College, who keeps the register of mushroom poisonings in North America. And he says he doesn't eat that mushroom, but most people really love that mushroom, and it's very enjoyable. And when you find it fresh and young, it's incredible what, you know, the taste and the structure. Now, awesome taste is turkey tails, but we can't chew them. I tried cutting them really thin and frying them hard so they get crunchy. It was still leather. And I didn't try cooking them for 24 hours, but what you do with them is, and they're easy to identify because they have these concentric rings on the cap, which get different colors depending on how hairy they are. So zones with more hairs get darker brown or whiter according to the hairs, and then often they can also have algae and turn greenish or even purplish, but always concentric. And then you turn them over and you see these little pores. So with a white surface with pores and a concentric ring, you have a turkey tail, and they have a really great aroma. So what you do with them is you make a broth. So you collect them and you just make a great soup out of them. And then whenever you cook, you can use that, put that in a sauce, You can freeze it. The older people here might remember we had a technique to make ice cubes. You know, we had like sophisticated plastic trays and you put that liquid in there and then we made ice cubes. And whenever you cook, you put an ice cube in your sauce or in whatever you cook and you get that infusion of great taste and the medicinal properties. So we have studies financed from the National Institute in Health, done at Bastille University near Seattle, where women who got treated for breast cancer, when they got turkey tail on the side, they had better outcomes, a longer life expectancy and much better feeling. The toxicity of the chemo was really reduced. The feeling was much better. And yes, we didn't have a control group that would have only gotten turkey tail. But there's some nice anecdotes about people managing to treat their cancers with it. But you know what's missing is double-blind studies for all that stuff. And our pharmaceuticals have no interest working with a natural substance because they can't get a patent on a natural thing. So they can get only a patent on one chemical or one molecule, and they gotta change it a little bit so they can call it their own. And often in these mushrooms, there's many things working together, supporting our immune system. It's not just one active compound. East Asia had used PASK, polysaccharide, I forgot the K. So it was a regular drug there and been used widely. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about guilt mushrooms. And as I pointed out, for guilt mushrooms, you got to look closer. There's many more lookalikes and also more toxic mushrooms. So guilts are these structures under the cap. And whenever you look under the cap, it's always about maximizing the surface of the fertile tissue that produces the spores. And guilts happen to be a very, very good approach for maximum surface under a cap. And most of them are in the order of the agaricales, but we have also guilt punipores, and guilts showed up many times in the tree, in the fungal tree of evolution. And also the most toxic mushrooms we have out here happen to be guilt mushrooms. And here the guy who coined fungophobia, William D. Hayes, he talked about vegetable vermin and the sneaky slayers of the innocent. He came up with that insight in fungophobia because all his colleagues and people he knew back then said, "What, you're writing a book of mushrooms? You're crazy. Why would you do that? You know?" And so he really realized how anti-mushroom British culture was. And and you can't just blame that on lack of interest into good food. I mean, it goes deeper. And here you have Galerina, autumnalis or marginata. Marginalis, the false skull cap or the funeral bell, and it has a little bit of a ring zone. See that area here, that little bit of tissue? It grows on wood. So if you try to pick magic mushrooms, you gotta know that mushroom. So some people go out and say, if you wanna pick mushrooms, you first gotta know your deadly mushrooms. I don't think so. You know, it depends what mushrooms you pick. If you wanna pick chanterelles, you don't need to know the death cap or so because they're very different. But as soon as you pick something that looks a little bit like that, if you wanna pick green russulas, you gotta know about deadly green death caps. And if you wanna pick any white guilt mushroom with a ring and so on, you gotta know your amanitas. Or if you wanna eat any amanita, and I mean, I'm sure you have heard lots about it here since the nurseries have brought that in from Europe with the English oaks and so on. Here it grows with hazelnuts in Bellevue. So it's not a native mushroom, but we have other toxic amanitas. And a lot of people are really down on these amanitas. But for me, I can say if it wasn't for the amanitas, you wouldn't be here. You would just be mushroom picking without asking, going anywhere, trying to learn about mushrooms, because the risk would be so much lower. So it's really, we have to be very grateful to these really awful mushrooms because, anyways. So here of the guilt mushroom, one of the easiest guilt mushrooms are these milky caps. So the saffron milky cap, sorry, that was the wrong button. When you scratch them or you cut them, they ooze out a milk. And in the case of the mushrooms that are close to the saffron milky cap, Lactarius deliciosus, they have an orange milk, which then oxidizes greenish. And that makes it really unique. There's only maybe 3 or 4 species that have an orange milk that oxidizes green, and that gotta be a Lactarius close to Deliciosus. We have one that is only very slowly greening, Lactarius estivus, which is Latin for summer, and I find that always the last mushroom standing before the snow covers it on the mountain passes east of Seattle, but really nice structure. So Lactarius and Russula, these mushrooms are in their own lineage of the Russulalis, and they have a different cellular structure. They don't have long fibrous cells, they have round cells, and that makes them crunchy, and they're young and firm. When they get old, there's not even fibers holding together, but they're really nice to eat. And then a little bit south of you guys, there's Lactarius rubidus. I've been told the northernmost distribution so far, but just wait it out. It might show up here too. Has been Mount Baker, so it's not so far away. And these guys, when you dry them, have a really nice maple syrup aroma. They have the same chemicals as maple syrup. And before, we used to bring them home, dry them, and then we smell maple syrup. But what we figured out is you take a lighter with you and you burn it right away in the forest, and you get burnt mushroom or maple syrup, and then you know right away. So a real shortcoming. So maybe you'll find it out here, and probably you guys should mail order it and spread the spores. You know, not every invasive species needs to be a bummer. And then, really also very tasty, and I like, are these shrimp russulas, which is Douglas fir associated, as is the candy cap, Douglas fir associated. These are much bigger, and this is one of the easy brittle gills to identify because it gives you a handful of criteria that are easy to identify. So you have in the cap, whenever you have a wineish red color, very helpful. And then you have a tinge of red on the stem, and you have, when you rub them, first there's a little bit of yellow coming out under white powder, and that discolors to brownish. And then when you're lucky, you have that shrimp odor, that fishy odor. And if you want to get to the odor of a mushroom, you don't smell on top of the cap that is protected by a thick cuticle, protecting it from rain and sun. That's not where the odor happens. So the odor happens in the private parts down below, right? So you smell where the gills meet the stem or in the stem base. So whenever you pick a mushroom, you want the stem base. There's a lot of information. There's color changes, there's odors. There could be mycelium attached in a certain way. It could be a yellow mycelium attached, or you could have a cup on the base like a vulva, like for the deadly amanitas. So the stem base is crucial to identify mushrooms. And once you know a mushroom, you don't need to take the stem base, you know, because you don't want to cook the earthy base of it. But before you at the stage that you know your mushrooms well, always pick the stem base. Over here, you have a close relative. Genetically, it's the next to the shrimpies, but it doesn't have that fish odor. Drusilla oliviaceae, which is a European name, and the rainbow brittlegill. See how there's a mushroom knife, and see how big these guys are. And really nice, firm structure, but without that fishy component. And then the probably most common Russula here that people like as an edible is once it gets attacked by the lobster mushroom, which is a secondary infection, Hypomyces lactiflorum, out here always on a short-stemmed brittlegill, Russula brevipes, which by itself is a good edible. It doesn't have a super convincing taste by itself, but it has good structure, and you can turn it into an awesome hummus. You don't need chickpeas. You just grind up, you parboil your Russula brevipes, maybe 5 minutes. It might be even harmless raw, but I have not dared it yet. Or you fry it up 5 or 10 minutes in olive oil, and then you grind it up and you add your lemon, your tahini, your garlic, your olive oil, and you have a great hummus. Many people won't be even able to tell there is no chickpeas in there. So I always make that each fall. And most people just kick these brittle gills because they're upset that it's not a white chanterelle or a matsutake. And also David Aurora used to rhyme Russulas better kicked than picked. But that was young David Aurora. So he came around and he now really appreciates these Russulas. And Yeah, so very easy to identify. You gotta cook them very well. Some people get a reaction to the lobster mushroom. I heard in Sycamoose one year, a whole bunch of people got sick when they made a stew with the lobsters. Paul Kroger shared that with me, and he suggested I gotta be a little bit more clear about not everybody has a good time with them. My wife wouldn't eat them. She got one sick from them. So, but they sell it on the Pike Place Market in Seattle. So if you sell it, and it fruits already in summer when there's hardly any mushrooms out there. So July, August, September, you can find them. And then they go in the woods in October, they're often rotten already, that late. And in dry years, they're out. So then the shaggy parasols, this is an invasive species from Europe, Chlorophyllum olivieri, has nothing to do with olive color. Olivieri was a person. And really tasty guys. They discolor orange when you touch them or scratch them, which then gets brownish. They have scales on the cap, which makes them the shaggies. They have a ring, and they have a white stem base, and they're white spore. So the ring, the white stem base, and the white spores puts them really close to the amanitas in their look, which can be very poisonous. The big difference is the shaggies. So the scales on the cap, a scale is a piece of tissue that's attached on one side and lifted on the other side. And amanitas out here don't have that. They have warts or they have spots on the caps. They don't have scales. But really what helps is that color change. We don't have a toxic amanita with a color change here if you cook them well enough. But east of the Rockies, there is orange staining toxic amanitas. So they're so tasty. They're so rich in umami. And whenever you pick these are saprobic mushrooms, so they're not root associated. Take that stem base with you and put it in your yard or where you go mushroom hunting. I mean, this is a suburban mushroom. They're not out in undisturbed forests. But that's how you spread the mycelium in your yard, and they fruit in spring and in fall, and so tasty. And then the native species is our Chlorophyllum bruneum, the brown shaggy parasol, has a shorter stem. So the stem cap ratio is smaller, not as slender. When young, it has a very stepped stem base here. And supposedly some people get reactions to that mushroom. That's the reason why it's not in trade. But I've eaten it dozens of times, didn't have any reactions. And then east of the Cascades, most common of these chlorophyllums is the white shaggy parasol, much bigger, easily 10, 12 inches diameter, and also very tasty. And then of course, these, in the old days, they used to be Procera or Macrolepiotas, the parasol mushrooms, which unfortunately we don't have out here. And then we gotta be careful because there's this really nasty look-alike, Chlorophyllum molybdites, that has green spores, the green-gilled parasol, and that one, nasty. And I talked to people who ate that and they wouldn't eat mushroom for years afterwards. So this can be 3 days in the hospital. And they like hot, humid summers. So something we don't have here. And it didn't grow north of California, but now it has shown up in the Willamette Valley, Walla Walla, Eastern Washington, and we have some records on iNaturalist for the Seattle area, which is really should be hot enough for them. And they like to grow in fairy rings in lawns. So good sized mushrooms. And when they're young like that, you can't really tell them apart of the other shaggy parasols. So you shouldn't be really much worried here, but especially when you travel, like in Hawaii, or you go in hotter climates, they are the most common cause for people's hospitalizations in the United States, but not in the Pacific Northwest so far. And then whenever you pick any of these shaggy parasols, it's good to know that you should stay at least above 10, 12, 15 centimeters in size till you know the mushroom, because as soon as you go to smaller diameters, like 5, 6 centimeters, there is these fatal dapperlings, Lepiota subincarnata, that looks somewhat like it, but size is an important criteria when you pick shaggy parasols. Don't start picking small things. And here, I don't know when I put that in, Kiss the Ground, great movie about how we need to transform our agriculture and really protect the soil, and what difference it would make for carbon concentration. Okay, so then another easy of the gilled mushrooms is the shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus. which has these cylindrical caps, has shaggy. So a lot of beginners confuse that with the shaggy parasols, but the cap shape is very different. See how they're elongated, and the shaggy parasol is round like a drumstick. And these guys are tasty, but they go very quick. They mature very quick, which means they liquefy. So their caps are deliquescent and they liquefy, which doesn't make it toxic, but it makes it black and slimy. And the cookbook of Chet Hyatt, he makes black pasta and black dishes with it. You know, if this is how you like to cook, maybe Gothic style, like cooking. So they are great for that. And the other thing is, don't pick them along roads or where there was industries, pollution. These are very successful heavy metal accumulators, which are also the shaggy parasols and also agaricus and puffballs. So these are mushrooms you should be very aware where you pick them. And in my book, I have 2 pages about heavy metals and mushrooms, something that's completely ignored in North America. We hardly have any studies. You can find studies about heavy metals in Nigerian mushrooms. You can find dozens of studies for each Eastern European country, for China, for wherever. US, we have one report in Fungi magazine about a guy who died from eating morels in apple orchards, where they used to use that lead arsenate to spray the apple trees. And they quit that officially in '69, but that arsenate and lead is still circulating in these old orchards, so don't make that a habit. The guy who died from that, unfortunately, he had to have it, he picked them like crazy, and then each day he had one of these morels for his, that was his evening ritual, and unfortunately, you know, they couldn't get the heavy metals out of his system. And then mine tailings, also something, wherever it's mining, you got to pay attention to that. When you're in a mountain town where there's mining, do not pick your mushrooms on tailings and so on. Or in the Seattle area where they use the water treatment mud they put back in the forest, and the mushrooms get loaded with that. We had one study in the Seattle area by Erica Klein. She put it online, but it was never published officially. It disappeared online. But she could really show how these heavy metals that came out of the water treatment sludge into the forest and then into the mushrooms. And that's why you use mushrooms for bioremediation. The fruiting bodies will concentrate the heavy metals. But the idea is not that we eat it then, right? The idea is it gets safely disposed of and the heavy metals taken out of circulation. And then very tasty and underrated by many people because it's a little hard to identify. Is the fairy ring mushroom, Marasmius aurealis. That's a reference to the fairies. And it's a little brown mushroom that has white spores, and often when they grow close to each other, you get your spore print already out there in the lawn. When one cap overlaps another, you can see the white spores. And they have a tough stem, so it's you shake them by the stem, and if they don't break, then, okay, this might be the fairy ring mushroom. And then you look it up. There's a lot of little brown mushroom in lands, like Foliotina, formerly Conocope filaris, which is deadly. And we had, luckily, nobody died from it. It's smaller, it's fragile, and has a very nice pronounced ring. But, you know, quite different. But this is not a beginner's mushroom, but it's so tasty, and it rehydrates really quickly. It can go completely dry, and then when there's enough water, it will produce spores again, something which most mushrooms cannot do. Okay, so here I have just out of the book 4 mushrooms that are little, these, you know, take a little bit more time to identify and feel safe about. Maybe the easiest down here, Mycetinus salalis. In the old days, it was also Marasmius. And it smells like garlic. So you walk through the forest and you suddenly smell garlic. You have stepped on one of these vampire bane mushrooms. That's the UK name for one of the Mycetinus. They have a very strong garlic odor, and 1 or 2 will give enough garlic to a dish. You can't eat them like a regular mushroom. You get sick from that. There is a trade of these in haute cuisine. Because you don't get garlic breath from them. So they have the garlic-like odor, but not the breath. And, you know, once you have that odor, there's not too many mushrooms, and we have all this awesome match. I broke too many marriages because the partner didn't know that when you were on this matchmaker program, you were not looking for a new partner, you were looking for a mushroom. So Ian was nice enough to change the name now to Match. So we all can feel safer when we work on that on the computer, and the partner coming in the room, you know, is not shocked that we're on a matchmaker program. Because that's the end of the relationship. So then here we have the street night, which was just fruiting in big groups, Tricholoma portentosa. So it has a quite yucky, quite dangerous look-alike, the panther Tricholoma pardinum, but this one has a sticky cap, pardinum has a dry cap, and this, when lucky, you have some yellow in the stem. And really tasty mushroom, good structure, but you gotta really be into your mushrooms. You gotta have experience that you wanna make that leap. And the best is whenever you go to a new mushroom, find somebody who already picked them and who survived picking these new mushrooms. And then eat that with that person. Or of course, take it to people who really have good knowledge and have them identified for you. But they are out here like with shore pine, in shore pine, Douglas fir, hemlock forests around the Puget Sound, often late in the season. Then here we have, I always push the wrong button, so Hyphaloma capnoides, which is very abundant on dead conifers, often when they already fell to the ground. And I know I got convinced of my ID capacities because of its taste. It has a metallic taste. And the much more common lookalike, Hyphaloma fasciculare, has these greenish gills and really tastes awful. Nobody ever gets poisoned from the, what's it called, the common name for?
Sulfur tub.
From the sulfur tub, because you should just taste it and spit it out. It's really so bad, it is amazing. So once a year I taste these things and just, you know, nobody's gonna get poisoned by its close relative. But this guy just has a straight metal taste, which will cook away. Good structure, good taste, abundant. You know, you go through a forest not far from here, hardly anybody picks it, and there can be 50 on a fallen tree. Really enjoyable mushroom, and hardly anybody knows about them. And then up here, another secret is the sweetbread mushroom or the miller. So there we already have two common English names that have a long history, means it's something special. And yes, it has a really toxic look-alike, some clitosity, some funnel caps, look just like it, but two major differences. This one has pinkish spores, as you can see here, the spore print on the cap, and it has a very strong farinaceous odor, which means flower-like, but not flower like you get your flour bag out of the closet and you try to smell it when you grind flour fresh. So, which we don't really do anymore. So the closest for us is often watermelon rind or cucumber. That's farinaceous. So many of the tricholomas have that farinaceous odor. We might have it on the table. Very good to know. And this one is excellent. So there was some blind tastings where they beat boletes, king boletes. In addition, they are often king bolete indicators. So European literature is full of that. You find these, you have a good chance of finding Boletus edulis around it. And I found a whole bunch of them around Boletus fibrillosus, our fiber or chocolate king, which is our only king bolete that is associated with Douglas fir. And then on wood, you have these clusters of honey mushrooms. Andy McKinnon says that's his favorite mushroom. Don't judge people, okay? Other people have, some people have bad experiences with it. This is one of the mushrooms you gotta cook long or even do a parboiling for 10 minutes. But the problem is then they get slimy. So then you gotta do dry frying. But they have a really rich fungal taste. They can be extremely abundant. And in Eastern Europe, people love them. But out here, most people ignore them and they can be overwhelmingly abundant. This year we had so many. These mushrooms kill healthy trees, so the foresters ate on them. And our most common is Armillaria ostoye, or the US name or American name is Solidipes. And they grow in clusters, have a little yellow in the stem, total shapeshifter. They have sometimes really fat stems, sometimes more narrow stems, have a ring, scales on the cap, white spores, which most clustered mushrooms on wood have brown spores. And then they have these shoelaces. They have these pseudo rhizomes, these root-like things that can travel long distance, and that's unique to honey mushrooms. I always want to go here, just switching the slide, which I can do from here. And then the oysters. So really good mushrooms. They can fruit about any time of the year. We have one oyster on the table, the ringed oyster, Pleurodus, help me. Dryanus, which dryanus means on oaks, Greek for the oak, like Dryophila being loving oak. And out here we find it often on, this was on elm, but I found it on apple trees or on maples. And this is Pulmonaris. This loves alders. So in spring, like in May, you know, when you go out where there's dead alders, there's these really tasty oyster mushrooms, which contain stuff. Let's see, do I have it on that slide? No, I don't. You know, the same stuff people take to lower their blood pressure. Statins. Yeah, so they contain them naturally. So to be safe with the oysters, if you don't know them well yet, don't pick anything below 4 inches in the beginning of diameter. So 10 centimeters, 12 centimeters, and of course, if they grow in a cluster, you have smaller, you have bigger, then you're safe. But when it comes to 5 centimeter diameter, 6, 7 centimeters, it could be often Crepidodus, one of the oyster links that are toxic. They're related to the fiber caps, Dinocebi, and they might contain muscarine. But really good mushrooms and lots of health benefits. And the pale oyster tends to get soft with age. And while the other oysters, here Populinus and Ostreatus, they get much tougher with age. And you know, they can get big, they can get like 20, 25 centimeters across on big cottonwoods. But there we have it here, contains lower statins and also reduces blood pressure and cholesterol levels. So really good stuff. And Ostreatus was supposed not to be out here after the first years of the DNA revolution. And then I found it in my hometown in Kirkland here. It was grown on European poplars. So it was introduced with the trees. Bluets, you had some on the table. So to learn the bluet, know the odor. It smells like, as David Aurora describes it, frozen orange juice concentrate. So it has this really fruity odor. And otherwise, we have a whole bunch of field mushrooms, but most of them happen to be wet caps, cordinarius, that have rust brown spores. While this guy has not rust brown spores, but dull pinkish, whitish spores. What helped me to feel safe about eating them. So on the table, smell them, and this is their season now. They come often very late in the season. They're saprobic, they're not specifically tree-associated, but you find them around compost, maybe under red cedars, quite good mushrooms. They cultivate them in the UK, they fly them over here, and in Seattle you can buy them, the flown in ones for $35. And then I hope everybody has found the Prince, Agaricus augustus, really awesome mushrooms, big and strong almond odor. So it's not 100% odor. Don't get stuck with the idea, but the book says almond and it doesn't taste totally like almond. No, almond is the closest we know. So we have to compromise when we label our mushroom odors because they're different. Sometimes it might be the same chemicals, but often it's not. And scaly on the cap, scaly on the stem, warm brown colors. So there's a lot of lookalikes that are grayish, cold looking, that are much more abundant, especially in fall. The Prince likes it warm and wet, and so good with that strong almond odor. And same DNA in Europe as in North America, which doesn't apply to so many of their characters.
Sorry, we have to leave. Sorry.
Okay.
9 o'clock.
Okay, sorry. No problem.
Are you still the one? Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's another agaricus, almond odor one, the other one only when old. Really good mushrooms out in lawn pastures, but often now with all the fertilizers put into the lawns or pastures, these mushrooms disappear. They are not so much around anymore. And then like you get David Aurora's Whatever the Rain Promises, and you read there's Agaricus californicus that just looks like it, and it scared the hell out of me when I was new to Pacific Northwest. But that mushroom basically disappeared because the agricultural practices have changed, and it never was a big issue up in the Pacific Northwest anymore. But people, when you look online, everybody who finds these mushrooms for the first time, but what about Agaricus californicus? And they say, yeah, that's a ghost. It's, you know, it was an issue back in 1983 or whenever the book was published, but now it's basically gone. Tricholoma equestre has that farinaceous odor and has the 3 yellow stem, gills, and cap. Really nice structure. And the main story here is now that people went around and now declared it a deadly mushroom. And yes, we had people die from it. But it turns out that the people who died from it ate 3 portions a day for 3 days in a row, or they ate it for 9 days in a row, and they died from it, which is very sad. But it's really the core message is here with mushrooms, with chanterelles and boletes, we know that doesn't happen. But there's certain mushrooms that your liver or your kidney can't take it when you overload them like that. But if you eat it once or twice, nobody took harm. And so I don't really like that labeling of making that a deadly mushroom, because we can kill ourselves with drinking too much water too, right? And so I still eat them, but I surely won't eat much of them or days on end. It's the wrong thing to do. Often pine associated here, shore pine too. And then of course the most famous of the Tricholoma, matsutake, the pine mushroom, very firm, sand on the bottom, white gills that are not decurrent like some lookalikes, pronounced ring. The old name Magni velare for us was big veil, and really firm. So you put that between your fingers and you can't crush it. And that makes the big difference because, oh, I don't have the lookalike. The lookalike amanitas that are really toxic, they grow in the same spot, they can look like it, but you put them between your fingers and they will break easily, and they don't have the aroma of the matsutake. And so whenever you go to a mushroom show or there happens to be a store that has them, smell them. You know the odor, you know the mushroom. And it's basically like red hots, hot reds, I never can tell it apart. Yeah, so cinnamon. The really interesting mushrooms. Europeans hated it in the beginning. They called it Armillaria nauseosa. It makes you nauseous. Here in Bhutan, the old name, the traditional name was Po Shamu. That's why these boys are giggling, the penis mushroom. Then it became a very important export mushroom to Japan, and they changed the name. Now it's Sanjay Shamu, the Buddha mushroom. So I think they still could compromise or combine these 2 names, and then we can respect the traditions. Yeah, so I organized one of my mushrooming tours is to Bhutan, gonna be mid-August next year. If you're interested in these ideas of mushroom adventure travels, or like the work I do and wanna be on my mailing list, leave your email here, name and email, please, so that I can read it. And I do like 3 or 4 updates a year about when I give talks, new publications, and mushroom travels. And usually it's good, I know that you want to go on one of these tours because they sell out basically as soon as they announce them. So this year might be already full, and I just published it on Sunday, the details. Okay, there's another Himalayan Amanita, choice edible, really nice, big, easy to identify, big vulva here, very flashy vulva. When the cap is not washed off, also very thick, yellow stem, orange gills, or yellow gills, orange cap, so very unique. The Tibetans call it the egg mushroom because it comes out like an egg and has the egg yolk color, choice edible. And this is the equivalent of the Italian Caesar mushroom, which the Italians, the nickname is also the great egg. And the Tibetan name is the chicken egg, jagon. Oh, I switched it off by accident probably. There we go. So now we hit the boletes, and that's the last section. Thanks for your patience. this is a beautiful bolete in Bhutan, reticulocept. So the reticulation of the stem, which often looks like it's the sponge, the pores that are climbing down the stem. And we have even frustosis, one that has fertile reticulation on the stem at least. So here it even climbed on the cap. And when older, it looks much more like our regular boletes. And the people in Bhutan call it the pashamu, the pig mushroom, which is the same as porcini basically, but they thought it's poisonous. They wouldn't eat it. They're out in the forest collecting chanterelles and matsutake and corals and fried chicken mushroom, but the boletes they would kick. It's like they're poisonous. So I went around there and did project work with Bhutan Network, did workshops here with the forestry department, and learned from them about edible mushrooms, but also taught people that the king bolete is a choice edible. And then in one of our mushrooming tours, we pooled money and bought them a first dryer. And now the government is all into. And here the National Mushroom Center got a dryer just for the king boletes. And here they said, oh, you gotta come and make the point to the villages. When a foreigner does that, they just believe you better than when we tell them. And I had my bolete t-shirt on here. And so, because they're out in the forest anyway, picking matsutake for export to Japan, and the king boletes got ignored. But I really want the people to fall in love with the king boletes because I think it's the best mushroom. And this was a really good year. Oh, here, we are not alone in thinking so, and this is good that we switched over here, because so we were in the forest and all picked mushrooms, everybody takes off, and luckily everybody comes back, and then we share what we have, and we sorted it. So the good edibles were gone, and comes this cow. And this cow is only going for boletes. So these are pale swillers, whitish swillers. And I mean, she knows what's good. She knew what's good. And then she's sniffing. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, there's another bolete. Let's go for that.
That's amazing.
And, you know, we were all ready to leave. And then we saw that cow. It was just so nice to see it. And I mean, many animals, us included, really eat mushrooms. It's not just a thing that suddenly started, you know. Yes, the English-speaking world is now waking up to mushrooms, to wild mushrooms. But yeah, red port boletes, you know, a lot of people are very worried about the red port boletes, and we have to be careful here. But the cow knew good stuff. Let's eat them. So this is the king bolete, which down here you might find it in parks with planted East Coast oaks, not the English oaks, but can sometimes also be associated with birch, with elm, with linden, and hornbeam. But out in the forest, out here, the easiest is shore pine, and then in the mountains, true fir, abies, and spruce, but not hemlock and Douglas fir. And such good mushrooms. You recognize them by the reticulation on the stem, and this is much more pronounced than it's normal. I think that guy grew that way too, had a fungal infection that makes it more pronounced, but you can see it here too. And here, if you would zoom in, and this is Grand Edulis, a different variety which turns brownish with maturity. They love shore pine. And most of our boletes, king boletes, Edulis, they go towards olive green. And the color, when you slice the flesh, there's no bluing in 99.9% of the cases. When they're waterlogged, they can have bluing, and once in a while, there's oddballs. But in general, they don't blue. Mild taste, sweet nutty taste, fat stem, big mushrooms, and so tasty. So these are really my favorites. And then when I moved from Munich out here, and then I didn't know where to find them because I had them before in the chanterelle forest, and I have plenty of chanterelles here in the Seattle area, but no king boletes because I didn't know I had to go in the mountains or to the coast or I looked in suburbia everywhere for spruce trees and true firs, and then I found them also with oaks, and then, you know, plenty of them now. These are my daughters 25 years ago. What's happening here? Are we going to the video? I see. Why do we do that? Yeah. This is one of our boletes that is associated with Douglas fir, only one of them, but it's rare, relatively speaking. While The Aegilis, when it's season, there's lots of them if you're in the right place. But these you find 1 or 2 here, and then you can go another 2 or 3 days picking chanterelles and you don't find them. Also good taste, darker, and hence the chocolate king. A bunch of other boletes here. Many of you know that marble bolete, Aureoboletus mirabilis, a little lemony, yellow pores, marbly stem, always on rotten hemlock. So it could have been the hemlock bolete, but it was already the admirable bolete. Then Lexinum scarbrum, wherever there is birches, especially introduced from Europe, good edibles, easy to identify with the scales on the stem, which is typical for Lexinum, the scaber stalks. With the yellow scaber stalks, like the red cap boletes, up with aspen and so on, you gotta cook them well. They upset a whole bunch of people's stomachs. So they have serochromic acid that is the pigment that makes them orange or reddish, which you don't find much in this birch bolete. And so you gotta cook that for at least 20 minutes to render it harmless. And then very common everywhere here is our deep purple bolete, Serocomelus atropurpureus. In the old books, it was Boletus celeri, which still exists as Serocomelus celeri, but it's much, much rarer. And this guy often, this rugose cap, not an uneven cap, a purplish tone, and always this brown, yellow, and red. And then you catch them, really enjoyable. In the mountains, we have butter boletes, but BC has very little of them. I don't know even if you have a record. These stain strongly blue and are really tasty. So blue staining for boletes doesn't mean toxic or inedible, but it means you don't have a king bolete, and it can also mean that it is a non-edible king bolete. Or it could mean it's a swillus, the jacks, which are like both of them here stain. This one here stains greenish in the stem base, our most common Douglas fir associate, Swillus lakei, and then pine associate, most common Swillus luteus, so you recognize by a purple ring around the stem. So out here in the Pacific Northwest, whenever you have a ring on a bolete, it gotta be a Swillus, a jack. And these mushrooms are ignored by many people, but if you dry fry them, and that's the moment to talk about dry fry. So when you have a mushroom that is soggy, or a mushroom that is a little bit softer tissue, or it doesn't handle frying well, like these guys, you slice them, you fry them without butter and oil. You let the mushroom release the water. If it's a lot, you put that aside for making a sauce. If it's a little bit, you just evaporate it. And then you add your butter and your oil once the mushrooms start sticking to your frying pan. And it makes all the difference. You get out here, you get a really nice taste, you get good structure. Something, if you fry them in butter and oil, you have a battle between water and oil, and it's all mushy and not enjoyable. So traditional people would just dry them, grind them, and use their taste in a powder for soup or sauce. And they're known for that. But with dry frying, you can enjoy them also without having to dry them first. Okay, here's some other boletes, how you enjoy them. Well, you can worship them. In Italy, in Tuscany, Monte Amiata, people go there mushroom hunting, lots of boletes. We like to clean them and bring them home clean. In Italy, they keep the dirt on the stem base, as they do with matsutake in East Asia, because if you leave the mushroom intact, it will stay fresher longer. So different approaches. How do you treat your mushrooms? And then boletes are awesome for drying, as are morels, for example. So slicing them, the old days I did it by hand, and then I found that magic machine. You know, and then the big boletes I have to cut in quarters or even smaller, but young firm, it's just one push, 12 slices, and then it goes so quick, the slicing and the drying. And then with the powder, oh, you can just put the powder on popcorn, so good, in sauces, or make a bolete butter. Any bolete is great in risotto, on pizzas, or you can eat your king boletes raw, really tasty. So some people might get a bellyache, but it's served like that in Italian restaurants in Italy. So you just slice them, a little bit of olive oil, balsamico, and maybe slices of Parmigiano in between, thin slices, and then salt and pepper. So the best boletes you bring home, we eat raw like that, and it's so nice. And then there is, of course, a few boletes we do not eat, but like 90% of our bolides are edible, doesn't mean that 90% are great. Because there's a whole bunch of swillers that are not that attractive. But anything that has intense red pores or orange pores, be very careful. Rubrobolidus, that new genus, we have 3 species on the West Coast. They are really toxic, and that one has actually killed a person in Spokane. The small intestine stopped working, and that's how the poor guy died maybe 30, 40 years ago. He was just in his 60s or so. And then the bitter bolides, often when you're new to bolide hunting, you think you scored, oh, I got a big king bolide, and then there's the blue staining, and when you taste it. So you don't need to pick such a mushroom. When you're not sure it's a king bolide, just take a little piece, put it against your tongue, and you get that bitterness right away. And you know your stomach will not keep that in. If it's really bitter, it gets thrown out. So let's see. And especially the red ones, the toxic Rubrobolidus has reticulation on the stem. So we have 1 red cord bolide out here, or 2 species of Neobolidus that is edible after cooking. They don't have a reticulation, but you gotta know your bolides. And for knowing your bolides, there's these bolide cards I made with Gary Gilbert. We have 53 species, and yeah, maybe Washington, we have maybe at least 45 of them. So some are California specific, one is Colorado, but many out here, and really a great way to study your bolides. I have only 1 package with me here, but you can get that from my webpage. And the pity is how expensive it is to mail between Canada and the US. It's like as if they want to disconnect us. But if you get a whole bunch of stuff together, like 3 or 5 or 8 of them, then it's still $30, and then it makes sense if you divide it up, and then it's even comparable to what if you mail one within Canada. So I didn't bring any of that stuff with me because it's the custom stuff, but on my webpage I have all of that. But most of the mailing issue was that now. This is the calendar. I brought only 3 of them with me.